There is a document in the Nuremberg trial record that the prosecutors considered one of their strongest pieces of evidence against Admiral Karl Dönitz. It was issued on September 17, 1942, one day after an American bomber attacked a German submarine that was conducting a rescue operation in the South Atlantic under a Red Cross flag. The document ordered every U-boat commander in the German Navy to stop rescuing survivors of ships they sank. No exceptions, no discretion, no pulling men from the water, no food passed to lifeboats, no towing toward shore. The document was known as the Laconia Order, named for the British troopship that had been sunk 5 days earlier and whose survivors the U-boat had been saving when the American aircraft found it and bombed it. The prosecution at Nuremberg argued that the Laconia Order was evidence of criminal intent, that Dönitz had deliberately instructed his submarine commanders to leave enemy sailors to drown as a matter of policy. The document that produced it began not with criminal intent, but with an act of mercy that was answered with bombs. And the legal consequences of that answer, the order it forced, the trial it fed, and the verdict it influenced, make the Laconia incident one of the most morally complex episodes in the history of naval warfare. To understand what the Laconia Order was and what it was not, you have to understand what happened in the South Atlantic between September 12 and September 16, 1942, beginning with a decision made by a German submarine commander that was not ordered, not anticipated, and not consistent with any operational doctrine that governed U-boat warfare. Kapitänleutnant Werner Hartenstein commanded U-156, a Type 1XC U-boat on patrol in the South Atlantic. On the night of September 12, he attacked the SS Laconia, a British armed merchant cruiser converted to troopship duty with 2 torpedoes. The Laconia sank. Standard procedure at that point was to note the sinking, record the ship's details, and continue the patrol. Hartenstein did not continue the patrol. He surfaced and began pulling survivors from the water. The Laconia was carrying approximately 1,800 Italian prisoners of war, men of a country that was Germany's formal ally in the conflict, being transported in conditions that meant many of them had drowned in the lower decks before they could reach the open water. The prisoners who had survived the initial sinking were in the water alongside British soldiers, civilian passengers, women and children, all of them in various states of injury and shock in the South Atlantic darkness. When Hartenstein's crew began pulling survivors aboard and realized the proportion of them were Italian, the operational picture acquired a dimension that no pre-war planning had addressed. The German Navy had no doctrine for what to do when a submarine sank a ship carrying its own nation's Allied prisoners. Hartenstein improvised. He organized a rescue. The scale of what he attempted is significant and is underrepresented in most accounts of the incident. Within hours of the Laconia's sinking, U-156 had 193 survivors on her deck, and in her hull, a loading that reduced her diving capability to dangerous levels and made her, operationally, no longer a warship but a rescue vessel. Hartenstein was towing lifeboats. He had fashioned a Red Cross flag from available materials and spread it across U-156's forward deck. He had transmitted a message in uncoded English on the international distress frequency, giving his position and announcing his intentions. He had, in other words, done everything a commander could do to signal that his submarine was engaged in a humanitarian operation and that he was requesting assistance rather than presenting a threat. The transmission was picked up by both Allied monitoring stations and by the German submarine command. Admiral Dönitz, receiving Hartenstein's report, made a decision that reflected the complexity of the situation. He ordered additional submarines to the scene to assist with the rescue and coordinated with the Italian command and with Vichy France to organize a surface vessel response. The operation that was assembling in the South Atlantic by September 14th was multinational, organized under improvised protocols that had no basis in any existing treaty or agreement, and was demonstrably working. Survivors were being collected. The Italian prisoners who had survived the sinking were being brought aboard submarines of their allies' navy, and a French cruiser was en route to take the accumulated survivors to port. The operation was imperfect and it was proceeding under obvious difficulty, but it was saving lives at a pace that was measurable. This was to Lord where life did of Mike. On September 16th, a U.S. Army Air Force's B-24 Liberator from Ascension Island reached U-156. The aircraft crew saw the Red Cross flag. They saw the lifeboats alongside. They saw the crowded deck. They radioed their base commander, Captain Robert Richardson, and reported what they observed. Richardson ordered them to attack. The aircraft made multiple passes, dropping bombs and depth charges alongside the submarine and strafing the lifeboats. The attack killed survivors. It forced Hartenstein to release the people on his deck and dive. The rescue operation in the area covered by U-156 was over. The people who had been on the submarine's deck were in the open ocean again. The decision made at Ascension Island on September 16th has been examined from the operational perspective that Richardson applied and from the moral perspective that the bombing's consequences demand. Richardson's stated rationale was that he could not confirm Hartenstein's stated intentions, that a German submarine transmitting in the clear was potentially executing a deception, and that his orders gave him authority to attack enemy submarines in his area of operations without qualification for apparent humanitarian activity. The operational logic within the framework of 1942 submarine warfare is not entirely without internal consistency. Submarines were targets. The identification of a target as a submarine was sufficient authorization to attack it in most operational frameworks of the period. Richardson applied that framework. The consequences of applying it were that a rescue operation conducted under a Red Cross flag was bombed, and the survivors being rescued were returned to the water. The Donitz received the report of the Ascension Island attack on the same day it occurred. He received a report that described a rescue operation he had organized, at operational cost to 3 of his submarines, being attacked by Allied air power, while the rescuing submarine was visibly marked as a humanitarian vessel. The message the attack sent was precise. The Allied command would not respect the Red Cross flag when it was displayed by a German submarine, would not grant operational immunity to a submarine engaged in rescue activity, and would attack a rescue operation if the rescuing vessel was an enemy asset. Given that message, the operational question for Donitz was straightforward. What should he tell his submarine commanders about rescue operations? The Laconia Order, issued the following day, was his answer. It directed U-boat commanders to prioritize the survival of their submarines over the rescue of survivors from sunk ships. It acknowledged in its text that the war's conduct by the opposing side had made rescue operations incompatible with the survival of the rescuing submarines. It ended the informal tradition of survivor assistance that some German submarine commanders had maintained and formally prohibited any future rescue activity. The Nuremberg prosecutors argued that the Laconia Order was evidence of a policy of deliberate murder, that Donitz had instructed his commanders to ensure enemy sailors drowned rather than survive. The argument required treating the order in isolation from the event that produced it. Donitz's defense argued that the order was a rational operational response to the demonstrated willingness of Allied forces to attack rescue operations, and that any commander responsible for the welfare of his submarine crews would have issued the same order under the same circumstances. The defense called Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the U.S. Pacific Fleet, to provide an affidavit on American submarine practice. Nimitz confirmed that American submarine doctrine in the Pacific included no requirement to rescue survivors of ships sunk by U.S. submarines, and that American submarines operated under orders that were, in their practical effect, similar to those Donitz had issued. The affidavit was significant enough that the tribunal ultimately declined to sentence Donitz on the basis of the Laconia Order, finding that the Allied practice was sufficiently parallel that using the German order as the basis for a criminal conviction was not sustainable. Donitz was convicted on other charges and sentenced to 10 years in Spandau prison, the lightest sentence of any of the major defendants convicted at Nuremberg. He served the full term and was released in 1956. The Laconia Order remained in the trial record as a document whose legal status had been complicated by the American affidavit, neither fully exonerated nor used as the basis for conviction, suspended in a legal ambiguity that reflected the moral ambiguity of its origins. An order to abandon rescue was issued in response to a rescue being bombed. The command that ended humanitarian action in the U-boat war was the direct consequence of a humanitarian action being met with force. Werner Hartenstein did not survive to appear at Nuremberg or to be examined on the events of September 1942. U-15-6 was sunk by American air attack northeast of Barbados on March 8, 1943, 6 months after the Laconia incident, with all hands. Hartenstein was 33. The submarine commander whose decision to rescue had set in motion the chain of events that produced the Laconia Order, the Nuremberg prosecution, and the Nimitz affidavit died without knowing any of those consequences. He had looked at the water around his submarine on the night of September 12, 1942, and decided that what was in the water mattered more than what the operational doctrine said he should do. He organized a multinational rescue. He flew a Red Cross flag. He transmitted his position in plain English. He was bombed. He dove. He returned to patrol. He died. The order that his decision produced outlasted him by 2.5 years and appeared at the most significant war crimes tribunal in history. The moral accounting of the Laconia incident does not resolve cleanly into the categories that make historical narratives comfortable. Hartenstein was not a simple hero. He was a submarine commander who sank a ship carrying nearly 3,000 people before deciding to rescue the survivors. The American pilots who bombed his rescue were not simply villains. They were operating within an operational framework that their command had authorized. Richardson was not clearly criminal. He applied a doctrine that was consistent with how submarine warfare was being conducted by both sides. Donitz was not clearly a war criminal for the Laconia Order. The Nuremberg tribunal said so explicitly. The event that produced the order was an act of mercy answered by violence, and the order that violence produced was the instrument that the prosecution at Nuremberg tried and partially failed to use to convict the man who issued it. There is no clean line in any of it. There is only the sequence of decisions: Hartenstein's mercy, Richardson's bomb, Donitz's order, Nimitz's affidavit, and the 54 words of the Laconia Order sitting in the Nuremberg record, produced by an act of humanity, used as evidence of inhumanity, and ultimately insufficient for either purpose because the tribunal found that the Navy that introduced it as evidence had been doing the same thing all along.